Hey, what's happening, all you bad mofos out there in the Black Army radio realm? Welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to the movement yet again. We're glad you locked in today. We appreciate it. Now, before we get to it, real quick, if this show's ever made you think, laugh, or feel some kind of way, do us a solid. Hit that 5-star rating. We appreciate it. Also, give us a follow. Takes a couple seconds, and believe it or not, it means the world to us. That episode that you thought was all right, had some good information, send it to a friend. We'd really appreciate that. And so today we have kind of we're going into kind of our second of a special that we had. We had our Memorial Day special where we interviewed Colonel Elaine Davies, and 92-year-old, one of less than 40 Marines total to ever deploy to Vietnam. And it was super duper blessing to interview her and hear what she had to say about a lot of different things, her experiences there. And super cool. And so I highly recommend checking out that interview with her. She was fantastic, and she was is, I should say, a spark plug. That girl. She is a 92-year-old spark plug. And so I hope, man, if I could be that cognitively with it in my freaking 90s, man, holy crap. I feel like she's got another 15 years, Joel. I'm not kidding. That girl is super,
Yeah,
she's just super with it. And so that's pretty awesome.
he was on it.
I'm gonna yeah, we're gonna separate this sucker into two parts. Joe's gonna start us off, and he's gonna continue his segment talking about ticks and, some research that we're discovering, some things we're discovering about the US government and whether or not they're weaponizing ticks. And it's not even just domestically, it's stuff's going on international. It absolutely seems like it's going on domestically. We do a lot of stuff internationally. And then I did the first part of our kind of governmental weaponization against its own people and the Tuskegee experiments from the early 1900s, where the United States government intentionally injected syphilis into the black community of some men down in Alabama. And it was like a 40-year experiment, and they pretty much all died. And then what they did with Guatemalans with syphilis and gonorrhea and some terrible shit over there with like 2,000 Guatemalan like orphans from orphanages, kids, little kids, man. And so, yeah, can't get down with it. And so I'm going to go into episode 2, and it's going to be focusing on MK Ultra. And so if you guys know anything about that, you're going to stand by to listen for that. And with that, I send it over to you, Joel. Over to you, big guy.
How's it going, man? Ready to
Excellent.
talk some fishy government stuff and some stuff I want to real quick breach into. And I'm slightly disappointed and more current event stuff with Massey losing is super disappointing. I'm worried that it just still shows the power of one Israeli lobby, and then also the power that Trump still has over that base, which is kind of worrisome against me because I think one, Massey's been pretty popular in Kentucky for a while, and then all of a sudden, you run a smear campaign, you spend 14 billion or $14 million like to run against him, and he loses. That's really disappointing.
In Kentucky, the most money
Yeah.
ever
Oh,
spent on a house race in American history was for the
yeah.
state of Kentucky. Nothing against you, Kentucky, other than the fact that you guys didn't keep Massey. As a matter of fact, I kind of want to say fuck you for that, quite frankly.
Yeah.
That really bothers me, man. It sucks a lot that Massey lost. I mean, not having Marjorie Taylor Greene in there, not having Massey in there, man, in the house is, I think it's a huge loss for just the truth movement. Forget about Republicans or Democrats. Let's just talk about outcomes here and the truth and what we were promised during campaigns. You know, people are out
Right.
there telling us we have Trump derangement syndrome because we dare to expect the outcomes that we were promised and why we voted for the motherfucker to begin with. And so if that gives us
Right.
Trump derangement syndrome, so be it. That just means that I didn't
I
change my mind, and I'm not going to be lied to. That's all.
Well, and in that case too, I have it for both sides. This is
Mhm.
purely because Trump's in cabinet right now and it's current. We could talk about all the bad things Obama did and Biden did and Bush did, but right now this is happening and it's affecting me in real time. And I think
Yep.
and it's not just affecting me, it's affecting everybody. So,
Oh
but
yeah.
yeah, it was kind of nice to see Tulsi Gabbard resign, but also kind of like we talked about earlier, where she didn't mention anything about the cabinet or her disagreements with stuff that she podcasted about and ran and helped run Trump run for. She didn't talk about any of that, just said her husband had cancer and that was the reason for her resigning. So it kind of seems like a scapegoat PR stunt more than
Yeah.
anything. But and with that being said,
Yeah, and
hopefully
it's
her
crappy
husband's
that
okay. I'm
yeah, that's exactly true, like, it's kind of a catch-22 if you're talking about it, right? Because you're like, I'm sure
yeah,
her husband obviously does have cancer because, I mean, she's not lying about that, and that's a good reason to resign for anybody to resign from any job, any position, right? To stay at home and take care of your loved ones
right.
in a situation like that, of course, but, my hope for her was that her resignation would specifically state to the actions of the administration that completely contradict everything she's been
Right.
talking about for the last 2 plus years on every single podcast that she's been on. And that's why Joe Kent resigned. And and so it's for me, as much of a fan of Tulsi as I was, it's really put a big damper. And the resignation is, I wish her husband best, and I don't think I'll be supporting Tulsi Gabbard moving forward. I don't think I can trust her. Just like I can't trust JD
If
Vance
she,
or Marco Rubio
if
or any
she
of these other
comes
people.
out
I
in
put her in the same category.
if if she comes out 6 months from now and starts speaking out and is, let's say, a whistleblower or something, that'd be about the only way that I could find any sort of retribution that she could give me anyways. I was on Tulsi Gabbard when
Yeah,
she
I
was a
agree.
Democrat. I was a big fan of Tulsi, and then she moved to,
Mhm.
the other side, which I was still a big fan. As she started gravitating because I've watched her for a long period of time back when she was Hawaii until she became a Republican, like, watching her tone change, trying kinda selling to the base of the Republicans was frustrating for me, but I still liked her, and I wasn't, like, as far as I thought it was good to have a voice like her on Trump's cabinet, and now that she's what
Yeah.
she's proven me wrong, which is very disappointing. So,
Yeah, man.
yeah,
She's been intentionally excluded from everything. I mean, I would resign in protest just from that. I'm like, listen, I'm the director of national fucking intelligence. Okay. And you're
right,
gonna take everything I put on your desk and you're gonna default to the Mossad and you're gonna veer away from
yeah.
what our US intel agencies and agents are telling you is actually going on. Pretty much tells you everything you need to know. So, yep.
And the weird stuff with the files getting pulled from her office like 2, 3 weeks ago, like, there's a bunch
Oh
of
yeah, I got
weird
stuff on that too.
how
They're all connected to MK Ultra
how the
and, like, the JFK
yep,
assassination, and,
yep,
like, the files that we thought or we were told destroyed like, were destroyed by in, like, the 1970s, I don't think they were destroyed. I think that they had and I gave them over, and then they took them back when they realized what they did, 'cause those files were supposedly destroyed in, like, 1973 or something. I think the CIA, in all their infinite wisdom, gave over files that they didn't intend, or a staffer did or something, and then they were like, "Whoa, shit," and they came
right,
back and got it all back. And so, anyway, I'll be talking a lot about that after your segment.
right. Well, and there's a lot of implications that Israel had something to do with JFK's assassination too, so it'd be just with the current climate of everything's going on, it'd be really good that they got those files back in their hands so it couldn't get brought to the public, so not surprising.
Oh, yeah. Might even have something to do
Um,
with nuclear technology too.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
very true. And I think another just quick current event segment or thing is that Donald Trump Jr. married a Palm Beach socialite. Her name was Bretta Anderson. Guess what Bretta is? She is a daughter to Harry Loy Anderson Jr. Is Jeffrey Epstein's personal business banker in the late 90s when all the shit was going on with the majority of the bad shit that was going on with Jeffrey Epstein was during the late 90s, early 90s, Clinton, Trump, that whole era. And I think it's pretty
Mhm.
interesting that just the circle there and how people could totally see through it. You know, when Trump first came out about this, he said one was never on a plane. He hardly knew Epstein and all that stuff was a lie. They found out that they flew on this plane, you know, like it's just to me how people could see, and this isn't like this is released stuff. This isn't made up conspiracy shit, and how people could just see through it all. It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
So fucking
It's like we
crazy.
said, Trump went platinum. He went platinum in the Epstein files. You know what I'm saying? He's deep, deep in the Epstein files. Epstein was also killed. I don't believe he committed suicide at all, at all. I'm not even gonna say he committed. I mean, I Epstein was
No.
also killed during Trump's first term as well, not during Biden's
Yeah.
term, during Trump's term.
And there's evidence that shown Trump was also trying to meet with Epstein as late as 2017, and the
Yep.
people who say against it, if you look in the Epstein files, it leads you on to a meeting. It never was confirmed. It never said it happened. But if you read the files that talk about this, it leads you on to that there's a meeting around Thanksgiving time between the two in 2017, you know? And that's long
Oh, yeah.
after the supposable falling out they had at Mar-a-Lago and everything else. Patel said that
Did
Trump's name was only mentioned 100 times in the Epstein files when it's now known that with the files are released, it's at least 5,000, and not knowing the other Epstein files, his name's mentioned more than any other person in the Epstein files, in fact.
yeah.
You know?
There's some there.
And that was
It's
under
like
oath
I
too.
say yeah. Best case scenario for all the Trump supporters is he was an informant that knew about a shit ton of pedophilia. That's the best case scenario. He was an
Yeah.
informant that was
Yes.
deeply involved in the world of internationally sponsored child rape. That's pretty much the best case scenario
Right.
for Trump. Worst case scenario is a pedophile himself. Period. The end. Period. The end.
Yep.
Yep.
And his behavior and the shit he says out in public would tell me the latter, but that's just
Yep.
me, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of
But
nonsensical stuff
so
happening,
anyways,
man. You know. Hmm.
going on to what me and Ty were talking about with our government doing nefarious shit, and most of it, the stuff we're talking about now is stuff that deals with biological, chemical, medical, pharmaceutical testing. And Ty talked about the Tuskegee in Guatemala and that whole time frame. Let's say Tuskegee started a little bit before that, but going into the 40s on to the mid 70s, our government was up to a bunch of nefarious shit. And this is stuff that is no longer speculation. There's CIA like release documents that talk about it. And I talked a little bit about talking where like these conspiracy theories have growing teeth with the ticks and what's going on now with alpha gal syndrome. And so we release ticks with radiation so we could see how far they'd spread. Kind of like so if we were going to infect a tick with a disease to see how viable it was to spread across. And at the same time, and this is some of the stuff where our government tries to defend itself. So the Soviets were doing a lot of testing on ticks as well. So it's kind of,
Hmm.
they call it like a gain of function study to see if this happened on our own soil, how would we counteract how far it could go. And this is the defense of our government saying like why they did some of this stuff.
They did the same thing with MK
And
Ultra. They said that with MK Ultra, they said that the reason they were conducting those experiments was because of the Korean War, because the Koreans, what they were doing to POWs, that they had like mind manipulated them or like broke their minds. And so
right,
the American government used the Korean War as an excuse for MK Ultra. Yeah,
right.
same kind of thing.
And
Mhm.
so this one's slightly skeptical. You have Operation Mongoose, and this one has to deal with ticks. And it talks about they were infected with tick and bone disease. And this is collaborated by a couple pilots of that era. One of, and I'm paraphrasing this quote. He said one of the craziest fucking flights I ever had to do is they had to fly real low to get these tick canisters out effectively to like do what they wanted. And he said it was a night
Mhm.
flight, and he was flying right over the sugar fields of Cuba. And this was actually during JFK's presidency, and they called that Operation Mongoose. So there's not direct CIA documents saying that they did that, but there's a lot of strings leading up to that it's highly speculated that they did. And this goes when you're talking about alpha gal now, and a lot of this where people are getting some of this conspiracy theory sense to it. In recent history, there's been a couple like scientific forums where scientists have talked about problems with our food chains, what we could do to fix it. And there's been a couple who brought up saying like there is diseases that make people allergic to meat, and that would be a way to get people away from meat and start eating other things. And these were
Mhm.
as early as I think 2013 was the first time this was kind of brought up in a scientific forum, and this is where a lot of the people are getting speculation. And in my dig to this, it's tough because I don't know where I lie as far as how conspiracy theory I get. There's obvious evidence that we fucked around with ticks. I saw a video of someone like showing the box and showing the ticks. And then I saw a video of somebody who was guiding a prompt for AI to make a video about a farmer finding a box of ticks that the government released. And the similarities,
Mhm.
like you couldn't tell which video is which. So and then you look to where the lady who started talking about the first time a farmer found a box wasn't actually a farmer. She was kind of a holistic health lady. So she was kind of on that anti-medicine, anti-government kick anyways. And which I totally agree, and this is where I stand on all that shit when it comes to conspiracy theory, healthcare system. I think the government and what we're gonna go into, what Ty has discussed in previous episodes, what I'm gonna discuss later, the government has shown time and time again that they've done nefarious shit. Pharmaceutical has been almost enabled by our government to test in other countries. If something goes wrong in our countries, typically they make a bunch of money, have to pay maybe 20% of the profits they made off the pill they're getting sued for. So I would say my biggest complaint is having distrust in the healthcare system, and mainly because of capitalism. You can't have for profit healthcare. They're not going to try to cure things. When the government's paying for healthcare, they're going to try to fix you because they can't afford to keep doing these
Yeah.
things. You know, they can't afford all this stuff. And not saying the government not saying I want all the government doing this, but for profit stuff enables all these things to happen. In the Tuskegee experiments and the Guatemalan experiments, there's Pfizer is all over those files and documents, and they had to pay restitution in both of those cases, you know? So these are big
Mhm.
farm being enabled by big government to do this shit, you know? So when it comes to alpha gal syndrome, I totally understand why there is a bunch of speculation that our government is behind it. When I'm trying to tie the lines with real proof, I have a hard time doing it. So I could see both sides of it. I'm kind of right there in the middle as far as how much our government has to do with it. There's also, I mean, it's been one of the hottest years on the globe in most regions where there's ticks, and that's a great, that's also another reason why they're spreading, so there's a lot of different things going on to make this a perfect storm for ticks to spread as well in the environmental
Yeah.
like sphere, I guess. So that's kind of I'm going to wrap up the tick thing and kind of go just a brief walkthrough of some of the other stuff our government has done in the last 30 years. Most of it was done in that Cold War era, but we're going to start. You have the Tuskegee, what Ty talked about. We don't need to talk more about that. The Guatemala experiment, and those were between 1932 and 1948 ish. And Ty today, like he said, he's going to talk into the CIA's MK Ultra program, what was roughly around 1953 to 1964. And then some of the stuff that I'll talk a little more in depth about is we had plutonium and radiation injections. Those were between 1944 and 1974. The Atomic Energy Commission and Manhattan Project injected plutonium and radioactive materials into dozens of unwilling hospital patients, prisoners, and pregnant women to study radiation absorption. These studies were highly classified, and it wasn't until 1994 when the Department of Energy declassified thousands of Cold War records under the Clinton administration. That was the extent of the radiation tests. That is when the extent of the radiation tests were publicly revealed. And so, and that also goes into some of the stuff Ty talked about when we were dropping nukes off in figuring out how fallout was happening and people walking into the storms. You have this group of islands out in the Philippines where like they had villagers on these islands and they're getting massive amount of fallout from our nuclear tests we did out there. So
Oh yeah.
and openly knowing it and not fixing it. You know, it wasn't until 20, 30 years that there was some retribution done. And now those some of the islands that were closer to it that were less inhabited are still have really high I why can't I think of it? Like nuclear activity, I can't think of the word. They still have high
Yeah.
the Geiger meter's still
They also
beeping
have high
when they go
radiation. I
there.
think they still have high radiation readings in their
Yeah,
soil.
yeah, yeah. Well, they found something really cool though, is that the coral reefs around the islands are thriving, but they think it's also due because no one's fishing there. So, like, there's no
Right?
fishery. It's kinda like a dead zone in the sea where people are staying out, so it's kind of funny that even the nuclear impact 20 years later isn't as severe as an immediate impact from humans, and I find that very fucking crazy. Not to say you can't eat those fish, you know, they probably have 3 eyes and whatever else, but, it's kinda wild that the coral reef systems there are having this great, like, rebirth, so it's pretty interesting. But so
Yeah. I think I
next
would
thing I'm gonna
contribute that
go
to the
into
lack of fishing
is
probably. I think I would contribute that to the
yeah,
lack of fishing
100%.
probably, It just the area has
Yep,
we've decimated a lot through the oceanography researchers and people that lead these kind of investigations. Fishing has there's some pretty wild documentaries on what that's done to the fish population, obviously, and the coral reefs. There's been some pretty terrible. I guess what is the Great Barrier Reef around Australia
yep,
that's just been like decimated, and most of the reef systems have, but they all
right,
have a purpose, like everything else. They help with the ocean currents and
right,
temperature management and like all kinds of different things. And so, yeah, those big disruptions that cause big problems for sure when it comes to the habitat. But yeah, that's pretty interesting around there. I could totally understand how people would stay clear away from that whole freaking area for pretty
right,
probably for another generation. You know what I mean? And then,
yeah.
people will start kind of forgetting about it a few hundred years after the fact, and that stuff will dissipate and it'll get
Right.
re-inhabited. But yeah, that's interesting.
And so some other things we did in that same time, this was between 1950 and 1960. This is Cold War biological open air testing. This was Operation LAC. This tested from what they said at the time they thought they were non-hazardous chemicals and harmless bacteria, but they're kind of proven that some of them were hazardous. And so what happened over North American cities, San Francisco, New York, Washington, D.C., Winnipeg, they studied dispersal patterns of biological and chemical weapons. So essentially they found things that had similar like, they found a spore that had a similar characteristics as anthrax, but wasn't as bad for you. So then they put this into the air to see if anthrax were to spread, how would it spread through air? And but they did this unwillingly to American citizens without them knowing. And one of the most common ones, and this is the one that has the best CIA documents that were released to back it up, was 1950. It's called Operation Sea Spray. They sprayed bacterial clouds over San Francisco Bay Area, conducted without public knowledge or consent, just like I talked about. And operation was aimed to test how vulnerable and major coastal cities would be to a real biological weapon attack. So the Navy essentially sprayed mist into the fog intentionally into the wind when it was carrying it into the city to see how far it would spread. The bacteria formed a cloud that contaminated approximately 48 square miles. It was nearly all of San Francisco, 800,000 residents inhaled millions of the bacterial spores over the course of the week. In this test, they used a microbe called Cerida marcescens. I probably fucked that up. It was chosen
Oh, so you got it
primarily
perfect.
because
You got it
it's
perfectly right.
yeah, right. Any scientist listening, you could come in and clean that up for me. Chosen primarily because it produces a distinct and bright red pigment. It allowed scientists at 43 sampling stations across the city to easily identify and track how far the bacteria is spread. and then they use Bacillus globigii to mimic this one was to mimic anthrax, essentially. So it had the same characteristics as anthrax. And at the time
Nice.
of spraying, they didn't think there was any problems. And this is where you wonder how much of these were actually, uh, how many people fell through the cracks, like who had symptoms but weren't reported. Because a lot of like people were getting urinary tracts infections from it. There was a 7-year-old who died from it, essentially. But with it being a urinary tract
Mm.
infection, that is, some people will treat that at home unless it gets real severe. So the potential that there's a lot more people affected than 12 patients. Uh, so they they revealed this in a lawsuit in 1981, essentially, and sea spray was not an isolated incident. This is one of at least 239 secret open-air germ warfare simulations conducted by the U.S. military on American citizens between 1940 and 1960. So I'm going to repeat that. It is one of 239 secret open-air germ warfare simulations conducted by the U.S. military on American citizens between 1940 and 1960.
And that's what
And
they're
this
willing to
goes
admit to.
into like when
That's
yeah,
what we've been able to find.
and yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that goes, so how much more was there, you know? And then another thing that we did, and this was in a prison system in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia to be specific. It was a Holmberg's prison experiments. Dermatologists at the University of Pennsylvania used prisoners, inmates in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, as subjects for extensive pharmaceutical and chemical testing, including exposing them to ditoxin and radioactive isotopes without their consent. So essentially just sticking fucking prisoners with radioactive stuff and not letting them know about it. And this is where
Yeah.
this is Big Farm had
You know what?
minus,
You know
I
what, Joel? It's
think
funny.
the
Something to think about when it comes to like the CIA injecting crack into the inner cities. And you're just like they needed
Mhm.
people to be able to run experiments on, like
Yeah.
the privatization of prisons, especially early on,
Yeah.
stuff like that. It kind of makes you wonder, right? It's like we put people in
Yeah.
there that society doesn't care about. If we need to
Well,
do things to them, like who's gonna? They don't have money.
and then,
They don't have representation.
yeah,
It's like they're the perfect people to put in there and do shit with because it's like who the fuck's gonna represent them? Nobody. Nobody's gonna represent
and then
them.
the money and then once the prison system is privatized, it's only gonna make money if you have prisoners. So what's the most beneficial way to flood the prison is create a law that throws people in prison and then put the drug into the streets that puts people in prison for having it, you know?
Yeah, and also, the United States incarcerates more of its own citizens than Russia, than China.
Yeah,
As a matter of fact,
we have the
the la
highest
yeah, the last
incarceration
time
rate.
I checked the last time I checked, for a free society with a whole bunch of civil rights, man, we sure as hell can't wait to put our people in jail, for a lot and for God, mostly for nonviolent related, like, victimless crimes. We've done that for a long, long
Right.
time. We find reasons to put
Well,
people in jail
and
for all kinds of stuff all the time.
it's the same money scheme that's going on with the detention centers. Those are all privatized detention centers, you know? Like,
Mhm.
it's a handoff, and that's one thing that Clinton did, you know? Clinton was he put more people in prison in the last fucking previous to the putting crack into the streets, he put more people in prison than any other president, and he had a bunch of ties to privatized prison systems, you know? Not a lot of people on the
Mhm.
Democratic side know that, you know? And he was considered one of
Yep.
the hardest Democrats running against crime in the last 20 years, you know? And it was because he specifically had deals to make millions of billions of dollars with these privatized prisons. But so
Mhm.
this is going to kind of lead me into, I talked about how pharmaceutical companies were talked about in Guatemala and the Tuskegee experiments. And I'm just going to go over some of the known cases that have gone to trial that are mostly American pharmaceutical companies have, and if they're not American, they have partial ownership of Americans or large ownership of American CEOs and ownership groups as well. So you have Pfizer, they had the Tovan trials in Nigeria in 1996. During a severe meningitis epidemic in Cairo, Nigeria, Pfizer tested its experimental antibiotic Tovar on children. The researchers failed to obtain a proper informed consent from their parents, and many of whom didn't even know their children were part of the experiment. Pfizer is also accused of failing to properly inform parents that a proven safe treatment was available at the same clinic. So there's a treatment that's already proven that doesn't take any testing, and essentially they're giving a unproven trial to these kids, not knowing if it's going to fix them to see if it will. And this is like we've done things similar to this. And so some of the results of this, 11 children died during the trial and the others suffered severe permanent disabilities like brain damage and paralysis. Pfizer later settled a multi-million dollar lawsuit with Kano state government and affected families of the court. So a multi-million dollar lawsuit for Pfizer is nothing. We're going to talk
Right.
about some of the drugs that have been recalled and they've got sued for, and they're making, in 10 years, they're making $60 billion off a drug, So a multi-million
Oh yeah.
dollar lawsuit to some some poor country in Nigeria, that they probably deserve 20 billion. That could probably change the fortune of that town or that country massively, and they give them a multi-million dollar lawsuit, it's fucked up.
Oh yeah. It's
Another
definitely the
one.
trade-off. It's totally worth the
Yeah.
trade-off, obviously. And then if you kill a few thousand people on top of it, in the United States, they can't even get sued for it anymore, I don't think. Like don't they have immunity
Uh,
now, the
it's a
pharmaceutical
roundabout
companies?
sort. Well, it's whoever's tied up with Monsanto. But yes, not all of them, but they did get immunity for, and that's to do with the shit they're spraying on our food. And that's the whole problem with like and we're just gonna go into, even when these people do get caught, it's not even a bump in the road for them. The amount of money they're
No.
making off of these pills, like when they get sued for one pill and they do a $2 billion settlement that's getting dispersed between 30,000 people, and they made 50 billion on it and they did a $2 billion settlement. It's worth them to have problems with their medicine, and they're going to make money anyways, and then we're going to have to pay out a few people. We're still going to make
That's yeah.
billions of dollars,
And that's the
and that's
difference
that's a big
between the
part of that.
corporation and the individual too. So, like, when it comes
Yeah.
to the corporation and the individual, like, they'll bankrupt the person, right? That's what they'll do. So,
Yeah.
like, if you're a human out there and you get charged, I've seen this as a cop, like, you get charged with whatever, like, they'll confiscate your possessions, your bank accounts, you know, your
Yeah.
property, stuff like that, almost make it impossible for you to pay for your defense in a way. You know what I mean? To
Right.
where it's a real easy, and then a lot of times you take a plea deal, which for the DA or the US attorney is an automatic stat for a win right there, boom. But then and they'll
Right.
cripple you financially 100% with purpose. But then these huge, massive
Right.
pharmaceutical companies, especially, that are raking in these profits, they'll hit them with, like, it's basically like charging them the price of a stamp. Like, we're going to charge you the price of a
Yeah.
stamp for killing all these people and doing all of this shit that you weren't supposed to do that you got caught doing. You pay that price of a stamp and you can keep going. That's your little fine. But for the individual out there,
Right.
you get crippled because they take everything from you. It's like it's a complete double
Right.
standard. It's a huge double standard.
Well, and it's subsidized by our government as well. Yeah, just some more fucked up shit that we did, or pharmaceutical companies did. Clinical trials at AZT to prevent HIV transmission. This was in the 90s. Sponsored by Western agencies and pharmaceutical interests. Trials were conducted across sub-Saharan Africa, Thailand, and the Caribbean to test effectiveness of the ATZ drug in preventing mother-to-child HPV or HIV transmission. The ethical breach. Researchers gave hundreds of pregnant HIV-positive women a placebo, a fake pill, even though ATZ had already been proven effective at preventing transmission in Western nations. Because these women received placebos instead of the known effective treatment, hundreds of infants contracted HPV needlessly. The trial sparked intense global debate and ethics using placebos. And so once again, we have a cure or we have something that's prevent to doing from something. Instead, we give people unknowingly who think they're getting treated, who think their baby that they're going to have isn't going to get HIV, and then they get HIV because we're fucking lying to them. Cervical cancer
Yep.
screenings in India. This is another one where the U.S. funded organizations involving pharmaceutical research structures a massive study that was launched in India to evaluate cheap cervical screening methods. The breach was hundreds of thousands of impoverished women were enrolled. Critics found that many of the women were not properly informed that they were participating in research. Furthermore, women in the control group were given no screening or treatment at all, despite cervical cancer being a fatal but preventable disease. So they have a control group that these people think they're going to get help with, and then they just let them die from this fucking disease. The testing of Depo-Provera in Zimbabwe between 1970 and 1980s before receiving widespread regulatory approval in Western countries like the United States due to safety concerns. A long-acting contraceptive Provovo was heavily distributed and tested in developing countries like Zimbabwe and Rhodesia. The ethical breach. Serovive tactics were used by population control programs to administrate the drug to Black Zimbabwe women without their full understanding of the potential side effects along. So essentially, they were giving this to women unknowingly as a form of birth control, and this birth control wasn't tested in America, so all these side effects they weren't warned about, and they were also giving it unwillingly, like it wasn't their choice. This drug was heavily restricted in Zimbabwe post-independence, and further intentionally safety standards were established, leaving a legacy of deep medical distrust. And then this ties into Latin America. Like Ty said, this is one that I feel like I could go into myself because it seems like there's a bunch of cases too much to go into on this in particular, but it just talks about why Latin America and Asia have been, as of current, are also, it's not just Africa. In the modern clinical trials frequently shift to regions like Eastern Europe, Latin America, and South Asia, where recruitment is incredibly fast. The recurring ethical issue is a double standard of care. Pharmaceutical companies sometimes test drugs against placebos in these regions because the local populations cannot afford any treatment, which would be illegal to do so in the West, whereas standards and treatments there don't exist. Furthermore, once a drug is proven successful, it's often priced out of local populations who've risked their lives to see if they could afford it. And so it just talks
Yeah.
about how the system essentially, their system enables our system to experiment on them. And then if it is something that's viable, they typically can't afford it anyways. And for the
Yeah.
ones who aren't given a placebo. And real quick, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'm going to go over about 5 of the biggest recalls and trials that have resulted in settlements in the last 8 years with pharmaceutical companies. What I'm going to do is talk about the settlement, and then I'm going to talk about how much money they had total in sales from that drug. And I think it's a pretty, and this is just, remember, this is just one pill from these pharmaceutical companies. And these pharmaceutical companies, depending on their size, have anywhere from 5 to 500. So let's just think about the money we're talking about. One of the biggest ones, my mom actually was on this. I'm pretty sure it was Vioxx. And I'm
Really?
pretty sure it's for arthritis. But so this was one of the biggest lawsuits at the time. It was for a $4.85 billion settlement. How much money did they make off that drug? And this is one of the worst ratios as well, as far as settlement compared to the money they made, or one of the worst ratios if you're the company, and one of the fairest ratios if you're somebody who suffered from one of the side effects from Vioxx. So the settlement was for $4.85 billion. They made $11 billion off of Vioxx, and that was just in a 10-year period. So I don't know what they made outside of all these were for 10-year periods, or as long as the drug was out, if it wasn't for 10 years. So Pfizer did Obroxabray. They had a settlement that was for $1.3 billion, and they made about $50.3 billion on the drug in total in sales in 10 years. You have Excelerato, it's a B.A.R and Johnson drug. They paid $775 million in restitution. They approximately made $60 to $65 billion in 10 years on it. And these were people who were suffering from side effects that caused severe internal bleeding and fatal strokes. You have Zyprexa, and this is from Eli Lilly. They paid out $1.3 billion to roughly 28,000 people. They made over $53 billion on that drug. And their side effects were not as severe as some of the other, but they were giving people diabetes and long-term health side effects that required more medication that these people would make more fucking money off of. And so this is a reason
Mhm.
why if something in
Forever
COVID
patient, homie.
happens in a vaccine, yeah.
It's all about
And
being
this
a
and
forever
this is
patient.
and
That's
this
the whole
goes
thing with like this.
well, and this goes to the mistrust with the government, and it goes into the pharmaceuticals and like what we're talking about with psilocybin and all these alternative medications where you could go see a psychiatrist for 3 or 4 times and then be cured, and then it's the whole, and like some of these what these drugs are for, there is off the shelf things that mainly consist with eating healthier diet stuff that we could promote, that these people wouldn't be making money, but we feed Americans shit because we have some of the lax food standards when it comes to the shit we put in our food, and then we medicate them because we get them fucking fat and happy. And a lot of these drugs had
Yep.
to deal with stuff that were directly related to either heart issues, being overweight, stuff like that. So general health issues, and it's fucking crazy to me.
It's yeah. And also, so I was curious. So I looked this up because I wanted to make sure we weren't fucked up when I said that whether or not pharmaceutical companies can be sued, they can be sued. However, there is various stipulations that are attached to that. For example, vaccines. So under the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, vaccine manufacturers are largely shielded from civil lawsuits for standard side effects. Okay, for like childhood vaccines. And that goes under, I never even heard this, the U.S. National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which that's an interesting name for an act that shields the pharmaceutical company from being sued, right? That seems like a weird name,
Yeah.
right? Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. Basically saying that if your child is injured through a vaccine, that the vaccine companies are not, they cannot be sued for it. That's what it reads like to me. Also, public health emergencies. What was COVID? COVID was a
Right.
public health emergency, right? And that's one of the reasons too why they were able to release the COVID vaccine so fast, is they used it under emergency authorization. And so under the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparationist Act, drug companies receive liability immunity for certain medical countermeasures. Pandemic related vaccines falls underneath that category. Okay. Those are pretty interesting because if you think about it, like what's the big fight with the Maha movement, right? With the whole thing with Robert Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr. And he was, interestingly enough, he was an environmental lawyer. He was really, really loved by the left for
Yeah.
a really long time. I want to say he was like single-handedly responsible for cleaning up, what was it, the Hudson River? Was that it?
Yeah, he did the
He did
Hudson
he did
River.
a
He
hell
was
of a lot
really
of work.
active in recent history. He was really active during the pipeline stuff that was going on in the Dakotas, in like kind of Bush Biden era, and he actually was one of the only people to win a lawsuit against natural gas companies, like in that whole thing as well. So yeah, he was
Yeah,
definitely on the left, leaned from environmental. Well, that's and I think too
yeah,
with
for
me
sure.
with when it comes
Big
to
time environmentalist.
I think when it comes to big farm and vaccination, I think there's a happy medium. I think there's like when you look at the measles vaccine, it hasn't changed its efficacy since it started. It never mattered how many people got it. That's been a 70% efficacy vaccine, and then 30% of the people who don't get the vaccine are going to get measles, you know? And then when you go into
Mhm.
there was a time when we were putting a lot of aluminum and heavy metals into vaccines, but we
Yeah.
outside of some vaccines having aluminum, we're not using like mercury and such anymore. And I think there's a happy medium of being a naturalist and medicine. And I don't know where that lies, you know, but like when we could eat organic and we didn't put chemicals
It
in our
lives
food,
where
we
the
were
elves tell me it
dying,
lives on my psychedelic trip. They tell me where the line is.
right? Yeah. Well, and when it comes to anything, when it's being forced down your throat, you're going to be skeptical of it, you know? And when you and I saw this firsthand because I kind of went back and forth with COVID. I was when it first started, I was kind of just like letting it happen. I was never back and forth whether it came from China, whether, you know, like on that side of it. But as far as like the vax, everything else, you know, and was it a pandemic? Was it something that got leaked and we had to deal with, you know? And I went from probably more of the left side to more of the right side based on new information. How she talked about in emails, how especially when it came to the vaccine, like Fauci talked
Yeah,
about emails about how he knew it wasn't the efficacy rate of the vaccine wasn't as high as it was, but he was scared that people wouldn't take it unless they said it was. And I don't care.
yeah,
That is a good fear to have, but you need to and next time something like this happens, the faith we have in our government doing the right thing versus putting billions of dollars into pharmaceutical companies is at an all-time low because you lied about the vaccine. You could have just came out and said, "Hey, we're doing the best we can. We have a vaccine that will help people not get as sick if they get it. So we think older people should take this vaccine. We think the high risk people should take this vaccine. If you're in the general
yeah,
public, you could take it if you want to. But instead, we had to say this is 100% has 100% efficacy. If you take this vaccine, COVID won't spread. None of that was true, and we lied about it. And there's at least emails that tell us lying about it, and that's why there's so many people like saying like then all of a sudden every vaccine is in question again, you know?
yeah.
And it's because time and time again our government does dumb fucking shit like we just talked about. And I think when people go into the MK Ultra shit, that like or when you go into the MK Ultra stuff, that's fucking bonkers
Uh,
as far as and then our government using safety as a reason to tramp on our civil liberties, to lie on us, to, you know, is safety. We had to do this because other countries were doing it, you know, and time again, it's the same fucking story, you know, and it gets old.
yeah. I mean, when I look at the vaccine schedule, especially having kids, I it wasn't something I really looked into all that much. And then the stuff that got me that I was worried about with the way before the COVID vaccine was just the fact that they give, like, infants, newborns, just so many
Right.
shots right away. Just boom, 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 like, they machine gun 'em in shots, and they don't, like, you can ask for it, they kinda look at you like you're if you asked the doctors to space out the shots, they kinda look at you like you're a conspiracy theorist, and a lot of parents aren't willing to do that, you know what I mean? To kinda get into a confrontation in a doctor's apartment or office with,
Well,
the right way to
and
give
know
your
what's
kids vaccines.
what's crazy too when it comes to kids, and you talked about America having the highest prison rate or like most incarcerated people of any like
Uh-huh.
modern country. We also have one of the highest infant death rates of any non-third world country, you know? And when you
Yeah,
look at places like Denmark, where I think they have a schedule that's between like 11 and 17 shots, where America has anywhere from, I think it
I think
was
it's like
23
30.
to 73 depending on. Yeah, well, you could take it
Yeah.
even more, and, like, I'm talking to the ages of
Mhm.
15, essentially. So,
Mm. Yeah.
there's other modern countries who are doing it differently than us, and to say that we have to do it a certain way, and every time you give one of these shots, a company is making a bunch of money, and I'm not also saying, like, I'm not one like, I was on the anti-vax stuff, like, early 2000s, like, and when I did a bunch of research into it, it's really hard to tell what is fucking up our kids. Is it the red food dye? We feed our kids shit, we inject them with a bunch of shit. Like, when it comes to, like, what is actually causing autism, what is giving us more ADD, it's such a vast thing. There's no good study that says, "I didn't feed my kid shit, he ate an organic diet, and I gave him this vaccine and he had autism." The variables in the studies are so hard, and that's where I ended up of I follow money. There's a lot of companies making money off vaccines I don't know are really doing anything. But also, like,
Yeah.
saying every vaccine is a cause of autism. You look at red food dye, you look at all the shit we spray in our food, like, it's really hard to tell what the lead cause is when you look into these studies, because there's not a study that has delineated enough variables and control groups that says this is the exact reason. They'll do a study of 10,000 kids who got a shot that got, let's say, 7,000 of them got diagnosed with ADD, but they're not going into what did they eat for their first 7 years of growing up. What were the water were they, like, and that's the biggest thing is, like, you could look at these studies, and if I wanted to attack red food dye number 7 for giving kids autisms, I could very easily do it because there's not a control group that's good enough, and it's the same thing with the measles vaccine, and that's the biggest thing that there's not as many people getting measles. I think that's good. Do I know that
Right.
vaccine doesn't cause autism? No, but I know the side effect that that vaccine has been the same since they released it. Its efficacy rate hasn't changed. It's steady. So I go back and forth with that shit. How much of it is conspiracy theory and how much of it is government.
Yeah. I know that there's weird stuff with like aluminum and the blood-brain barrier and things like that in
Yep,
the in those
100%.
vaccines, kind of filler components and stuff, and that's pretty interesting, and I mean, RFK Jr. wrote a book, I think it was called The Real Anthony Fauci, which he published. I think he published that before the COVID vaccine, wasn't it? Wasn't that I'm pretty sure he published it before the COVID vaccine, to where he was pretty
Let me
critical
check.
of that guy pretty early on, and, some of the big out there's a hell of a lot of information in that book. I mean, there's a lot, and I've read parts of it. I haven't read the whole thing, shame on me, like, altogether, but I have had parts of it, and I've heard him talk about it a number of times, and it's kinda like the main arguments pretty much are that Fauci prioritized high profit pharmaceutical products and vaccines, like, over affordable, repurposed therapeutic treatments that work just as similar. Kinda like,
Yeah,
the whole argument with horse dewormer on Rogan. Remember that
yeah,
shit with hell, what Malone, Dr.
yeah.
Malone,
The
who basically was one of the guys who, like,
I've
was
heard
foundational on mRNA vaccines and was
right.
talking about how shit, what's the name of that shit? It's won all kinds of awards
Ivermectin.
and ivermectin, all kinds of and CNN
Ivermectin,
made yeah,
it it won the Nobel Peace
oh, go ahead.
Prize for treating malaria in Africa. It's done a bunch of stuff for parasitical stuff as well as
Mhm,
some virus stuff. And
mhm,
ultimately, it may not have cured COVID, but it wasn't gonna hurt you from getting COVID. And a lot of people take it for, parasitic cleanses as well, because it has a very
uh-huh,
low side effect rate to the human. So I know people who do parasite cleanses who will take it for 2 weeks to cleanse their body from parasites as well. And the biggest thing is it's pretty much harmless to humans, and it wasn't gonna make any money. So that's why
well, that
they,
was the main thing is it
and
wasn't gonna
that's
make any
when
money. Yeah.
Yeah.
And another reason too is they didn't want to because they had the Emergency Act, and that's the act that keeps them from getting
Yeah.
sued. The Public Health Emergencies Act under the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act
Right.
basically ensures that your drug, if you develop that drug, and this is another claim with RFK Jr. too that actually makes sense a lot in that book is that Kennedy argued that Fauci used billions and billions of dollars in federal funding to dictate global medical research pretty much and punish punish dissenting scientists and silence alternative treatments. And ivermectin was
Right.
one of those things when Dr. Malone came out and started talking about that, about ivermectin. And listen, if ivermectin worked, and based on many accounts that you can go out there and read, and listen, I'm not a doctor, this isn't my field, but I can fucking read. And I'm smart enough to understand outcomes at this point in my life. It seemed to me like vitamin D mixed with ivermectin, if you don't have any comorbidities, right? You're not fucking obese, you don't have cancer. What we were finding out, especially with the COVID stuff, is a lot of people that were dying, they had comorbidities and they're all elderly and a lot of them were horribly obese, terrible, terrible shape. And then a lot of the death rates, you'd get people that were in a car accident, died in a car accident that tested positive for COVID, and they would put those under COVID deaths statistics.
Right.
And that would help
Right.
when it came to the Public Health Emergencies Act with the COVID vaccine, because those numbers all mattered. And if you have a guy like Dr. Malone, who's as credited as he is, wildly, wildly intelligent and credited, and is a developer of a lot of this stuff, and he's telling you that, hey, if you're healthy and obviously another argument they were making is this wasn't killing kids, and it wasn't killing kids.
Right.
And it was one of those things where depending on what state you lived in, it was a mandated vaccine, even for infants. They were giving it to freaking infants as a part of their regular vaccine schedule upon birth. And there was a lot of it's harder. The research is coming easier to find now that stuff is kind of coming out, and we've moved past that a little bit as a society. But if Fauci or them admitted that, oh, if you don't have comorbidities, if you're not elderly, and you do get
Yeah. If you're not
COVID,
at high
you and you're at high risk, exactly, you can take vitamin D, ivermectin, and water and sleep. You know what I mean? You're going to come out of it. But the thing about
right.
it is, if that cures you, if that's what you take and it cures you, which a lot of people did, and it worked, then guess what? The COVID vaccine doesn't fall under the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparations Act anymore. It doesn't, which also means
Yeah.
that they can be sued if people end up dying or having complications from the COVID vaccine because it does not fall under that act anymore, correct? Because that act only works if there's no other available treatment. If there's other available treatments, then that vaccine no longer falls under that act, which means that those pharmaceutical companies can now be sued, can now be sued.
Right.
So the real thing about this whole deal was when Malone went on Rogan and then CNN tried to make Joe Rogan look like some sick, super
Cancer patient.
sickly cancer patient in there. Yeah, exactly. In there when they were showing him on CNN when he was talking about ivermectin and vitamin D, amongst other things that he was given, just an IV of fluids. And he was just he was given a cocktail of things. Ivermectin was one of the things that he
Right.
used. That's what he would say. But that's what they focused on because ivermectin is an actual pharmaceutical drug that you can prescribe somebody. And that's a fucking
Well,
problem, Joel.
and they called it,
That's a big
and they were
problem
calling it a
for them.
horse train, and they were calling it a horse dewormer. Which, yes, it is a horse dewormer, but it's also been used on humans for a long time. They didn't lead the. It was purely made to make him look bad. Like ivermectin's just a horse dewormer when it was never. It was originally made for humans with malaria, and then it's gone into the. I'm pretty sure I could be wrong, and maybe it was a horse, but either way, it works and it has low side effects on humans. You know, and
Uh-huh.
whether it was the vitamins, the ivermectin, and that's another thing what annoyed me. And this goes back to being on the same boat. Is he's a rich dude who could just go to his personal doctor and be like, "Hey, give me that cocktail." where like
Mhm.
most inner city people are going to get really fucking sick. They never took a fucking vitamin in their fucking life. They're eating fucking McDonald's and shit, like
Well, they
where it's
definitely
like
weren't taking the COVID shot
that's when you
either. They definitely weren't taking the COVID
yeah,
shot
that
either.
that is
Why?
true.
Because of the Tuskegee experiments of the early
Yeah.
1900s. That's the why
Well, I
that's literally
think
why
all
they
this
told people when they went door to door that they weren't gonna take the shot, was because of the history of being lied to by the pharmaceutical companies already. And this whole MK Ultra thing,
well,
I think what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna push it out. Let's just push it out to next week because this is actually a good amount
okay,
of information here right now that you've talked about that we're
right.
continuing to talk about. And I think we're gonna be stay right around that mark that we kinda wanna stay around, to keep folks interested and not be too crazy long on stuff. But I mean, dude, and yeah, if you're in the inner city, you're not in a lot of ways, there's a reason why there's so many fast food. I mean, it's not like you find a natural grocers in Watts. I mean, maybe
Right.
there is.
Yeah.
I don't think so. South Chicago,
No, you
places
you
like
you
that.
find you
First of all,
find
it's
you
expensive.
find check into
Mhm,
cashes in liquor stores and convenience stores. You don't find Whole
mhm.
Foods or natural grocers. You find anything that enables a community that's disenfranchised already. You find all the things there to continue enabling them. Shitty food,
Absolutely, and
access
it's not
to
like they're
bad
going out
banking
dropping it.
practices.
Yeah, and they're not harvesting an elk,
Yeah.
and getting natural food that way. They're not growing a garden and getting natural food that way. They're in a lot of ways, they're fucking shit out of luck. I mean, frankly, that's really what they are. But all this stuff is interesting. The stuff that Kennedy came up with, that whole Maha movement is interesting. I feel like it's kinda died. Do you feel like it's just died? I mean, it was such a
Well,
huge prominent part of the
I feel
initial
like some of
administration
it's
stuff.
died. I feel like some of it's died because those same people who are worried about what the doctors are giving us are worried about what they're spraying on our food. And then when the
Mhm.
cabinet decided to make it so we can't sue Monsanto and I think it was Monsanto and Pfizer. I could be wrong. It might have been Bayer, the two companies that joined up and are producing glyphosate to spray on our fucking food. That glyphosate just had one of the biggest settlements for getting for giving people fucking cancer, and then they just made it so we could keep spraying it on our food. I think a lot of the Maha movement just was like, this is about money like it always is. I thought this was gonna be different, and it's follow the fucking money, It's the same thing with the
Yeah,
COVID
there's been a
vaccine.
split.
The biggest company the company who made the most money on the COVID vaccine was Moderna, and the person leading, Project Warp Speed was a self-appointed somebody who Trump appointed to his cabinet, who was a former Moderna employee, you know? And it's just like, follow the fucking money. It's all there. It's just like Fauci. Follow the fucking money,
It's the oldest story in the history of humanity. Follow the money.
you know?
And that's dude, I mean,
It's
the
true.
COVID vaccine, I think, it's a perfect, God, just representation of that, man. I mean, there were God, that time was so wild. It was when I look back at that stuff, the time I spent part of my time in Washington during that, and the way that Washington State handled it was fucking dude, it was like draconian, man. The kids were in masks like all the way up till 2023. The social
Right.
distancing, compared to a lot of other states. I mean, the way that they were with kids in schools. I mean, dude, could you imagine? I felt so bad for kids that were juniors and seniors in high school. Juniors and seniors in high
Yeah.
school because you get one high school experience your whole like fucking life. You know what I mean? And if you're an athlete, dude, if you're an athlete and you're in high school and kind of a knucklehead like what I was, like your whole goal in life is to get a college scholarship to go play college football or baseball, right? Basketball, something like that. And it's like these poor kids, man. I mean, for like once it kind of initially, I remember when the initial lead up to COVID, I remember kind of being freaked out myself. I mean, nobody knew what the hell was going on, you know? I
Right.
mean, people out there, when you look back at it now, there's a lot of people that'll lie to you and tell you that they weren't worried at all from the beginning. I know for a fact people that were worried from the beginning and then said they weren't later on. I'll tell you right now that I was. I didn't know what the hell it was. I didn't know what that meant. You know what I mean? Like, I was listening to what everybody was saying and reading the news in the internet just like everybody else, and it was like it took me a while in research, and then, like, as the years went on and it's like the stuff just wasn't adding up, and, like, I got COVID a couple times, and it was like a flu. It
Right.
wasn't anything worse than a cold. I mean, I've had
Well,
worse colds for
and
sure
I
than I ever did
and I
COVID.
this is this is one thing that stuck out with me. I was watching this guy do stand up, and he was this black dude, and he was talking about COVID, and he was like, "Fucking COVID, that was so weird." Kind of like you were saying. He's like, "And I got COVID, and it wasn't really bad." And like, I think some of it was manufactured and stuff. And this lady in the audience, and he's interacting with the audience, being funny. It's much more better delivery than what I'm saying. And this lady in the audience
Your delivery is
audience made a
excellent.
noise, and he goes, "What?"
How dare you?
Yeah. He goes, he goes, "How," he goes, "What do you mean? How did COVID affect you?" And she goes, "I lost my whole family." And then he was like, "Oh, fuck. I guess a lot of people did die
Yeah.
from COVID," you know, and that's the hard
Mhm.
thing with the sensitivity around this conversation, because depending on where you lie, you know, say you have a parent who died from COVID, but all your aunts and uncles got the vaccine and didn't die. You're going to feel totally different about that vaccine than, say, somebody who was a 35-year-old male who's single and just doesn't give a fuck and was like, "Yeah, I'll wear a mask if you." And that was me, more or less. Like, I was married at the time, but I was, if you want me to wear a mask in your establishment, I'll wear a mask. You know, like I just kind of,
Mhm.
it's like if I want someone to take their shoes off in my house, take your fucking shoes off. You know, that's how I saw it. You know, if the establishment said
Yeah, there was
wear a mask when you come
you know,
in,
I
I
felt
did.
bad for too was,
But
like and my wife has brought this up to me because I was kinda like especially towards the end, I was starting to get really assholeless about it, man. I was just so done with it, and,
right,
the guys that pissed me off the most were the guys I'd see in the big jacked up trucks with the American flags flying off the back of it, and they'd put their mask on to go into Walmart, and it started to make me
right,
mad to be like, "What are you standing" like, you talk so much trash against people wearing masks, and you're not willing to kind of push it yourself and be like, "No, I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna walk
right,
through your store anyway without my mask." And I became one of those people where I was just like, "Nope, I'm done with it. I'm not doing it." And I
right,
got kicked out of a lot of places in Washington because of it, because Washington was still so draconian about all of their regs when a lot of other states, even later on, were pretty much moving away from a lot of things. But it's like the regular employees, the waitresses, the bartenders, right? The store workers at Walmart or City Market or, a Safeway or something, right? And it's like you got these guys making barely minimum wage, maybe a little bit more than minimum wage. They're told by their managers, you see people without a mask, you got to kick them out because that's your fucking job. And so I'm paying you to do to work for me. And then like it's not the managers or the owners of the store that are getting the pushback. It's the guy making 20 bucks an hour or 18 bucks an
yeah.
hour bagging groceries, or doing whatever they're doing, and they're like, "Hey, sir, can you put your mask on, or you got to leave the store?" And then he kind of had guys like me that were like, "Yeah, fuck you," and I'd walk away and I'd leave. I would. It's not like I would stay in the store, but they caught the brunt of it. You know what I mean? It's like the wrong people were
Right.
catching the brunt of those experiences, and unfortunately, that's kind of how it works because you're representing the establishment, and if you get pissed off at it, it's like customer service. It's like the guy answering the phone on customer
Was
service isn't probably really the guy that you need to be pissed off about, but he's the guy representing
yeah,
the institution. And so he's the guy that's going to get cussed at. And it was it
yeah,
was shitty
killing.
looking back at it because the wrong people caught a hell of a lot of crap for that whole thing. And
Well, and
and then
it's
when it
just
comes to the high
slaying the
school,
messenger.
well, yeah, and the high school thing, like you had this actually really pisses me off because I really feel for these kids. Like there were kids out there for sure. There were prominent athletes and lost out on athletic scholarships to colleges because they didn't play any ball their junior and senior year at all. Zero. I mean, you know how much growth you have, especially as a male, from your sophomore year to like your senior year, like physical growth. And
Right.
to like, if you've
Well,
dedicated your whole life, like I think about my boys, we play a lot of baseball. and it's like they're getting really good. And like my one of my boys pitched a no hitter like just the other day, pitched his ass off. I mean, hell of a job, hell of a job. Couldn't have been prouder as a parent. And it's like if he would have been a junior in high school in Washington and he was a phenomenal baseball player, and we had been working 10 plus years and all the money I had invested as a father to for all the camps and practices and everything else to just to have him have every chance he would have had to even play college ball, forget about pro ball, just have a college opportunity was out the window. I mean, think about how many like young men and young women, volleyball players, softball players, and the female side, track stars that lost out on future investments through academics because of the politics of COVID, especially towards the later years in places like
Well,
Washington, California, New York State,
and
Illinois, like the states that really, really held on to all that stuff way past the point of being reasonable. And they took all these opportunities away from
I
those
think
kids. They took those opportunities away and they'll never get them
well,
back, ever.
they well, and also for the younger kids, they with the testing and stuff, you have a bunch of the younger kids where they're a year and a half behind in reading or math. For me personally, like me and Aaron started our company and we built our business plan pre-COVID. So we were going with all these numbers that were pre-COVID before the cost of everything went up, before. So literally when we're getting our tooling machine to make our handle to it become a real thing, COVID started. So people are shutting down. You're
Mhm,
getting timelines of like, is this going to be done? Are you guys even in the lab right now? And then you're going out to promote this to investors, and all your business plans totally fucked up because you're working with COVID prices now. So everything's gone up. The materials, the machining, everything's gone up. And even since COVID, like a lot of those industries haven't fully gone back down to where they were before. Like COVID set a new bar for prices and a lot of the stuff hasn't gone down, and some of it's good, like in the trade industry, like tradesmen are getting more than they ever got paid before, but the sad fact is the people don't have the money to pay it anymore. So now trades are starting to
mhm,
track down. But like COVID, a result of COVID was like industries like nursing, the trade industry where you could continue to work is one of the only industries where if you were a carpenter, you're in a house, it was up to the person if they wanted you in the house or not.
yeah,
It wasn't a company or someone up above telling you you couldn't be there. It was really depending if the person was comfortable with you to be in their house or not, you know?
mhm,
And what I hate most about it is it was politicized and it divided our country. Like I said, the mask laws are super fucking annoying to me. I didn't want to fucking get in a fight at fucking Walmart with somebody. So I would some cheesy fucking mask, barely cover my face. I go in. One day I forgot my mask. I went into a store and someone straight up fucking lit me up about not wearing a mask. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm probably more like you than you fucking think. First of all, you think you acting like this is gonna make me wanna wear a mask even more? Do you think this is gonna make me be like, "Hey," you know? And it was crazy too. This was a really weird, impactful experience that I had at a store, and this guy was, behind the counter, and he wasn't wearing a mask anymore, and he had a cleft lip. A really bad cleft lip. He was an older gentleman, probably about 65. He looked like he might have been from India or something.
mhm.
And he said he missed wearing the mask because people didn't stare at his face so much. And it was this totally like different, had nothing to do with COVID, just humanity experience of this one gentleman in a store who had a deformed face and the mask was a security blanket for it. I love the mask because someone could say something really fucking outlandish and you couldn't see my full facial expression. I have a face that
Yeah.
doesn't lie, and if someone says something I don't agree with or something fucking crazy, like I make 'em and when I had a mask on, like I could just fucking smile underneath my mask and be like, "You're a fucking complete fucking idiot." That was the only thing I liked about the
Oh,
mask,
man.
though. Outside of that, it was fucking
Yeah,
retarded.
I stopped.
But yeah.
I was even though I was in Washington, man, I stopped. I just stopped outright. I was done. I figured out places that weren't gonna kick me out. when it came to groceries or getting a coffee or, just doing whatever day-to-day stuff. That's where I focused. I just went to those places and I just stayed away from
Right.
everything else because I wasn't abiding by it
Yeah.
anymore at that point, you know? And
Right.
yeah, man, you look back, you're supposed to live and learn on that stuff, but at the same time, as a society, there's going to be a lot more stuff that comes out about that's going to piss us off in the years to come, you know, like the
Right.
financial gains, the stuff with Fauci. I don't trust that guy at all anymore, especially reading into the stuff and if RFK Jr. was wrong in his book, they would have sued him. They would have sued him. He had a hell of a lot of
Right.
stuff to say about Anthony Fauci in that book, and Anthony
Well,
Fauci
and
never
the
threatened to
biggest
sue
thing is
RFK Jr. Even once,
if you look into
you know?
if you look into big farm if you look into big farm in the insurance industry, there's a reason why there's so much mistrust, you know? And when you look at the money exchange, and this goes back to like why a for-profit healthcare system will always be skeptical because it's about the money. It's not about the cure. It's not about fixing people. It's
Yeah.
about making sure you have returning
I mean, we saw that.
customers, you know? It's
Yeah, we saw that big time with the Malone thing, and it had to listen.
yeah,
It's a really, really striking point to this whole thing. That COVID vaccine, if it's not under the emergency mandate, if ivermectin and vitamin D works, it cannot legally fall under the emergency vaccine mandate. It cannot.
and this is a tough thing when it comes
Well, that's the reason why YouTube and a lot of these outfits would pull down those videos. Remember that? Like, you would try to
right.
get information and it was all censored. It was censored on Facebook. It was censored on X. It was censored, or at that time, Twitter, I guess. It was censored on Instagram. It was censored on YouTube. Like, they were censoring out information that was real. Listen, ivermectin and vitamin D works. Staying healthy works. Not having comorbidities work. All that shit was like, fine. If you believe, if you're a vaccine supporter and you think that's the reason it worked too, then hey, fine, if that's what you think. But all that, you can't discount the fact that all that other stuff worked too, which means that it doesn't fall under the emergency authorization. Which also means all the people that were vaccine injured under the COVID vaccine, and there are quite a few of them. I mean, you can read a hell of a lot of stories about people having heart problems. Heart problems seem to be kind of the big thing with it. You notice that? A lot of the stuff I've been reading about, a lot of heart problems.
But look at the amount of people who got COVID and that's the biggest problem with like the vaccine injuries is COVID and the vaccine create the same injuries. COVID produces myocarditis. COVID vaccine produces myocarditis. And this is when I was looking at like the autism in the other vaccines, like it's so hard to tell what is doing it. If COVID gives you myocarditis and the vaccine gives you myocarditis, if you got the vaccine and you got COVID at some point, which gave you myocarditis? I'm carditis or whatever it is. The swelling of the heart essentially was one of the biggest things,
Yeah.
and that's like the loophole. And not even standing up for the vaccine, but when I've dug deep into this stuff from the in the middle of the ground, you get into this like wormhole, and it's like the same thing with there's a lot of skeptical, especially for treating viruses with the RNA vaccine styles. But there's also like we're coming up to finding cures for cancer with the same type of research, you know. So what is good and like it's the happy medium of what's right and what's wrong, where's the money, where's the studying, who's providing the study. It's such a wormhole, and it's because of the money, it's because of capitalism what does this. If we actually had to have
Mhm.
results that were proven that we didn't want to spend money on because we wanted to cure people and it wasn't based on capitalism, we would have a medical system that would work and benefits for the people, not for the people who own
Oh,
the
yeah.
companies.
Yeah, the dots with COVID and Fauci are weird
And
'cause you
especially
think about
when,
Wuhan, the fact that he wasn't in charge with NIH or
yeah,
over there, the fact that they had if it was released from there, and at the same
we
time, the
funded that
vaccine that they
lab.
developed is the only one that. Yeah, and then it's like, okay, so it's released from there from where it's developed with Anthony Fauci's fingertips all over it, and then this is where all this capitalism stuff comes into play, right? It's kinda like you can almost think about it with all the money that was made
Yes.
after 9/11 too, and you're like, how can you
Yeah.
trust this shit? And it's like, even if you're like you can take it past the point of whether or not you're out there and you believe the vaccine worked or didn't work. What you should look at is how this fucking happened. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yes.
if it
That's
was
that's my
obviously developed in
biggest
that lab, I think,
but
in Wuhan, and then
I'm
if you
I'm
develop
glad
a
you
vaccine
I'm glad you've, like,
with that.
not came to that conclusion, but that's where I'm at. Like, this came out of a lab in
Mhm.
China that we funded. People
Yep.
had vaccines in the wings to make a bunch of fucking money. Like, that's where I'm at, you know?
And they
Like,
needed
whether
the
COVID
emergency
happened.
authorization. Yeah, and they needed the Emergency
Yeah.
Authorization Vaccine Act to make sure they weren't gonna get sued if there was a monumental amount of injuries. It's like, you produce the fucking problem, you produce the only acceptable remedy to the problem, you outlaw
Well, and
everything
then
else, right? You have a monopoly at
the
that
ho
point.
the
At
ho
that point, you own the monopoly.
and the hospitals were also getting kickback for mortalities. So, like, when there was a mortality from it, like, the heads were telling the hospitals to say, like, "Okay, this is an old guy who got COVID. We don't know if he died from COVID. He was on his deathbed already, but we're gonna say he died from COVID." You know, and it's the
Yeah.
same,
The hospital got
like,
money for it. Mhm.
and that's where it's like we create systems that enable these things to happen, and it's like this is totally not anything to do with COVID, but like water in Colorado. Like, the farmers are allowed at a certain amount of water every year. Say you have a real heavy year with water and you don't need all that water. If you don't use that water, they're going to give you next, they're going to give you less the following year because they said, oh, look,
Mhm.
you didn't use all this water that you needed. So then, as a farmer, you're letting, at the end of your cutting season, you're flooding your fucking fields. So you make sure you get that water next year because next year could be a drought when realistically we should be storing that water, and we create these systems by our government that enable
Dude,
people to do the wrong thing. The rancher isn't doing anything wrong. The rancher's watching out for his own ass. But the system says, hey, use this water. You're not going to get it. So they're wasting water.
I got a story that follows exactly along those lines. Exactly. Except it's just about fiscal responsibility. So back when I was a Fed, right? You have the end of every fiscal year, which I think is in September. And, my particular agency and outfit, we were allocated a certain amount of money every year, right? And if we didn't spend all of that money by the end of the fiscal year, come the next fiscal year, they wouldn't give you that exact same amount of money again. They'd give you what you spent, right? So if we spent, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, I mean, $100,000 less the next year than we did the year before, guess what happens the next year? We get the lesser amount.
Yeah.
And so what I would have happen is, and this is no shit, I'd have my captain get a hold of me and he'd be like, Bricker, God damn it, we got 45 days less in the fiscal year. You got to spend $12,000. You got to figure out a way to spend $12,000 on equipment. I'm not kidding. And it'd be like, you get new tires for the truck, get a new bumper for the truck, get a winch, get some GPSs, right? Go out and get different optics for your weapon system, first aid equipment, sleeping gear. Like, I remember I was an instructor for all kinds of different stuff, and I would travel a lot. And so I went and bought like a one of those really, really good Pelican coolers that's like $1,000 cooler because I was a mounted patrol instructor and I was teaching horsemanship for law enforcement officers. And I would sleep in my trailer and I'd have all my food in that cooler, and I would come up with excuses. But the bottom line and it wasn't just me. What he would do is he'd take that average and for all the officers underneath them or agents underneath them, right? And say, each one of you have to spend $12,000 by September. And if you all need to
Right.
do it, figure the fuck out, spend that money, and then we would have the same allocation of funds the next year, right? But it's just like, why can't you just? And if you think about how many different federal agencies there are doing that exact same thing, literally 60
Yeah.
days before the end of the fiscal year, you're going to see massive amounts of spending in
Yeah.
every single federal agency there is out there because they're going to need to meet that quota. And they're buying all kinds of shit where what you could do with all that money, because you could take it from all these different agencies, all these different, it's going to total tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars at least, right? And it's like, why not take that money and reinvest it back into the budget or whatever. You know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
have a surplus. But it's like that's not how they saw it. They're like, nope, you
No.
got to spend it all so we can get the same the next year because that's how it's written out. It made no fiscal
Yeah.
sense whatsoever. I mean, we were burning through money those last 60, and this every single federal agency does this. It doesn't have to be a law enforcement
Yeah.
agency. Okay, like the Forest Service will do this. That's like anybody that's just a regular federal agency will do this shit. They'll make sure by the end of their fiscal year it's all spent. All of it on
Right.
something, anything. Just fucking spend it. And it's like, dude, that money could go, I mean, it could go at least back to maybe helping balance the budget or I don't know, something, help pay for healthcare or like student loan
Well,
forgiveness or like something for
it,
our own people, you know? I mean,
yeah.
it's amazing that the war
Well,
hawks aren't like, we need to reinvest all that money back into Israel, but it's pretty crazy how that shit, it goes along those same lines of the water that you were talking about. It's the exact
yeah.
same thing. And it happens all over the United States for those exact same reasons.
I
And
mean,
so,
I think this all goes into mistrust of the government and healthcare and everything else, and it comes from these CIA, like the stuff I talked about today. There's CIA documents. That's not conspiracy theory stuff. Project
oh yeah,
Mongoose was the biggest conspiracy theory thing I talked about, but that was on the heels of the files that talked about us leading or letting out ticks and fleas with radiation. So I mean, that's
yeah,
and also as a society, let's not let the next pandemic or whatever weird fucking thing happens divide us. Because that's what happened with the mask became a flag. Like, oh, you're a lefty or you're a
yeah, they
righty.
really
Like,
did.
we need to work together.
Mhm.
We need to start working together
I
and
remember
make changes
seeing
in this
people get
country.
tattoos that said Team Pfizer and Team Moderna. Like people are getting
Right,
tattoos
right.
that said Team Pfizer and Team Moderna. Is just like whole the people that are wearing masks in their cars by themselves.
Yes. Just
I mean, shit was getting so crazy.
fucking
Shit was getting so crazy.
weird.
And so
Well, and
anyway,
it's
we're gonna cut this people, but like next week, so we got MK Ultra, and we're gonna talk about that because there's just a lot of information. I want to make sure that it can really get in there. And this is good shit. And a lot of the stuff that Joel breached today is gonna go right into that. And then at the end of the week, I think we got a special guest. It looks to me like we got a guy that's going to go back to the psychedelic conversation that we were having before. And obviously, when we were talking about not being a forever patient, like what Joel was talking about when it comes to the pharmaceutical stuff, and you can use other outcomes so you're not taking antidepressants for 50 years of your life, right? And so this guy that we might have, he's still operational. He's still, when I say operational, he's paramilitary doing some stuff. And he is pretty invested in a lot of these psychedelic outcomes in South America and some of this other stuff, but he can't really talk about it because he's still operational and he's still got clearances and the Holden boy's still out there kicking doors and doing work. And so if we can pull this one off, he will be undisclosed, but it should be a pretty damn interesting conversation for the end of next week. And so I'm looking forward to that one, buddy. Other than that, have a good weekend, man. Have a
indeed,
good weekend, man. I appreciate you. I got to get these boys to baseball practice.
indeed.
It's baseball, 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 baseball for days, man. For days, like all I'm doing right now. But I love it. I love it a lot.
'Tis the
So,
season.
'tis the season, brother. Good work today,
Well,
man. That's a lot of good information, brother. A lot of good information.
yeah, whatever you're doing, I'm gonna make Ty's son a little famous if you didn't mention already. Ty's son pitched a no hitter, which is a dream for many of kids and adults, and
Yeah, dude.
so whatever you're doing,
And he's a
whatever
little shit
whatever
too.
coaching tips you're giving
Mr.
him, it's
Steven.
working out.
It's all those years and years and years in the backyard of just throwing balls, throwing, catching, and hitting, man. And I'll tell you what, it's really paying off for them boys right now. They're killing it. Couldn't be prouder of those kids. And so I got no problem with taking them to
Well,
baseball basically every day. And so I love it. I wouldn't have it any other way, brother. All right, man. Have a good one. We'll talk soon.